Hi everyone, it's me again, and Squish Gang is present, and today we're going to do, hopefully, the last video on the Creepshow Art situation. This is because Emily Artful made this video last night, at the time I'm recording this, which I actually watched literally the minute it came out, and have done all of my notes. First, some housekeeping. I have a stream on Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for my 5K subscriber special, woo! So if you would like to see that, that will be then. I posted on my community tab and I'll link the stream before I go live. Some friends on the platform that have suggested to me to put a Amazon wish list in my descriptions. This is just because I wanted to upgrade the channel, but unfortunately I'm in college and broke, so I can't do that. They said this is just a way that if anyone wants to support, they can. They could just leave it. It doesn't really matter, but that's in the description. Trigger warnings for the video. We're going to talk about addiction. We're going to talk about stalking. We're going to talk about aggression. We're going to talk about manipulation and coercion, things along those lines. And I felt like I needed to make this video because the Creepshow Art video is my second one, is my top performing video ever. And when I have really good performing videos like that, I feel like I have to kind of keep everyone updated on everything, because obviously there's some sort of like want to hear what my opinion is. And today we're going to do it a little bit differently than I did that time, just because Emily's video was far less long and less drawn out. At Emily's being about 1 hour 34 minutes and Creepshow Art's being like 2 hours and 30 some minutes. So we're going to actually have two parts of this video. We're going to have an analysis of Emily Artful's video point by point, and then we're going to have rhetoric of Creepshow Art's video in contrast to Emily Artful's video. For those of you that are new, this is a rhetoric-based commentary channel. I study English literature and rhetoric, and with a minor of philosophy at this university called the University of Waterloo in Canada. And this is what I study. So this is what I bring uniquely to the channel. If that is interested, there will be timestamps below. To get right into everything, I also want to mention that if you notice I've skipped some points in my recap, that is because it will be discussed in more depth of the rhetoric component in the second part of the video. So now, part one, Emily's video, point by point. Emily Artful gets into the intro, similar disclaimer style as Shannon, but with far less aggression and much more positive tonality. This is to be expected given Shannon's personality in general being quite unpleasant and one that isn't ideal for having to apologize for anything, it seems. Emily dives in right away with a more matter-of-fact approach. Creepshow Art's video, if you can remember, kind of goes in as like a, you guys are all slandering me, defamation, defamation, I hate all of you, I owe none of you anything. Like, that's kind of how it broke in right out the gate.
Emily created a false narrative, so no matter what is said after, even if I debunk all of her claims, she can still claim that she is the victim. That is why I made the decision to handle this legally before I ever responded back publicly. Any person claiming to be me before this on any other account was not me.
Emily's just kind of like, okay, well, this brought forward some things I feel like I need to address. I also do want to clear my name in a way that is as concise as I can possibly make it. But it makes sense that 1.5 hours out of a 2.5 hour long video and about a decade or two of history. So I understand why that would be a length that has to be done.
I'm not going to go over Shannon's video point by point. That would take forever, and I'm not trying to make y'all watch another 2-hour video.
Goes into the letter too as well, pretty like right out the gate, like the legal letter, so if we remember from Creepshow Art's video, she said like, if I've made this, it has been addressed with lawyers and has been solved outside of this.
If you are seeing this video, it means one of two things has happened. Either one, my lawyers negotiated with Emily's lawyers and we reached a private settlement which resulted in some form of retraction, or two, I took Emily to court for defamation and came out the other side.
Shannon considered just sending a threatening letter to have the issue solved, which is really encompassing of her personality, it seems, because Shannon seems to think that as soon as she says something or as soon as a idea of hers is brought forward, that means that is the word of gospel and that is how everything is going to work. Emily brings up the non-edited version of the Google Doc. I think I have the edited one. I have one from pretty early from the video being released, but the one that was in the comment, no, the one that was in the description was, the link was dead by the time I got to it. So it was the one that she put in a pinned comment, which I assume is the edited one. If anyone has the unedited one, I don't know, slide into my DMs. My Twitter's linked down below. Once that legal letter is brought up and Emily describes the fact that it wasn't really actually any like legal action, she then delves into the idea that Emily was not the spike in the coffin for Shannon's career. This is what some of our fellow commentary girlies were saying. I said it. It's Malcolm said it. I recall Beauty Demon saying that, bring that notion up as well. I will discuss this further in the rhetoric section, but internet cancellations, as the inflammatory like to describe them as, typically come from a stem of multiple events that have built up to some sort of like climax of events. Like, you know, when you write like narratives and you have like, or English literature gang, if you read or write narratives, you have your basis, your rising actions, and then you have your climax and your solution, blah, blah, blah. So that would be at your cusp of everything. If Shannon did not have all of the lolcow stuff, the betrayal, and the obvious lying, I'm not saying she would have gotten off even remotely scot-free. That's not what I'm going for at all. But what I'm saying is there would definitely be like let's look into this. People would be willing, maybe, to have heard out the second video. Do I think so necessarily? I'm not sure, because you can't be certain. Hindsight's 20/20 and everything, of course. The idea that it was only Emily, I agree, was not an accurate way to describe the situation, and even Emily doesn't think so. And then Emily even talks about some of the like blatant manipulation tactics that Shannon did, such as the butchered links to Emily's videos, so that when you clicked on them, they were dead. So you'd think that they were taken off or privated, even though that was not necessarily done. I personally believe, regardless, you're allowed to delete videos, you're allowed to private videos. I don't really understand why people get so mad about them. Now, before I start getting timestamps in my comments for my Jimmy Snow video when I said he deleted his Gabby Hanna apology videos, you can't get away from me, haha. You shouldn't delete videos directly addressing things or apologies or things of the like. But if you make a commentary video 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that you just feel like isn't the tonality you want and doesn't represent you anymore, you're allowed to get rid of it. My channel started as kind of just a rant channel of just talking about my life in school and stuff like that. And there were a couple videos that I felt like were overtly inflammatory in my own frustrations with everything that had happened to me in my childhood and growing up in high school and blah, 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 that I got rid of them. But this was like far before anyone knew who I was. I don't think you're not allowed to delete content. What I think you shouldn't do is you shouldn't delete like content that's addressing situations that people know you for, because then it seems like you're being avoidant of that situation. Then Emily starts talking about the DeviantArt account from when she was 13 and how Shannon was making the comparison to 13-year-old Emily's actions being representative of who Emily is today.
In her first DeviantArt profile under the name Gothic Kazooie, which is clearly her as seen in this picture, Emily talks about stalking her teacher in various posts, something she admits to doing in her video uploaded in 2016 titled My 7th Grade.
And brings up the point that a lot of us mentioned. Emily brings up the fact that it literally makes no sense to take this kind of weird fixation that she had on a teacher at 13 years old when being frequently misdiagnosed with mental health conditions and being poorly medicated as a way to describe who she is in her early 30s. And then Emily comes in with the first slam dunk of the video, which is like literally a clip of Creepshow Art talking about a 14-year-old, like a YouTube account, I believe, just being like, well, why would you ever judge them on their actions and their kids? Like, people change, you're hormonal, you might be in an unstable situation, and it's like...
So if you weren't dramatic on the internet when you were 12, then that must make you a liar as an adult. Sorry about the heavy sarcasm there, it's just such a ludicrous notion. The YouTube channel A Copy Art made a fascinating discovery of this really interesting clip from one of Shannon's past videos.
I believe the following clips just showcase how double-faced Shannon really is, and the funny thing is, it is her own word.
It's f***ing wild how people treat this literal child online. Like, there is a creator who is literally 14, who people want to call every name in the book because she acts like a creator who is 14 years old. She is 14 and people are having post threads about why she's the worst person in the world. And I'm just sitting there like, that's a child, guys. People often forget that pretty much until you are about 25, your mind is in a constant state of flux and you are constantly learning and changing and growing into yourself. People act like who you are and what you posted when you were 13, 14, 15. Like that represents you for the entirety of your life and that you are going to stand by it to the end of the world and you aren't going to be and act like a hormonal person who is being ravaged by puberty and how terrible that shit is. Back when I was 14, I was writing a story, a full-on 30-page story about being in love with Gerard Way and made up an entire life where me and Gerard were together. And yes, at some points, that story did get steamy. Now, some part of my very stupid teenage hormone-fueled brain knew that I shouldn't share that story with the world, because I would be made fun of until the cows come home. If I had made the mistake of uploading that to fanfiction.net, then that story would be used today to expose me in some way. Like my puberty fanfiction and fan art of me with an adult man that I was in love with because I was a hormone-addled teen going through puberty, that would be used to expose me as a fucking adult.
So Shannon, you, in your own words, acknowledge that literal children should not be demonized and labeled as terrible people for making a mistake because their brains are still developing.
This was the first idea of what we'll get into later, the propaganda-style rhetoric of Shannon's video. Now, people are probably going to say that that's hyperbole for me to use the word propaganda, but propaganda in a structure of rhetoric just means inverted rhetorical reasoning, which we'll get into in part 2. Then Emily's talking about Shannon fixating on Emily's addiction and then says that Shannon did drugs too. That was like, damn, okay, wow. Emily explains that there's like multiple ways to be addicted to things and that the different mixes of medications are going to cause different problems, which of course I agree with as well, because it's like medications have weird side effects on people. Like I take an asthma medication that heightens anxiety because it puts your heart rate and your circulation higher, so you're constantly in this like fight or flight. And sometimes I'll just like, my body will be doing like panic attack symptoms, but my head is fine, which is the wildest. Like when I'm just trying to hold something and I can't because my hands are just shaking. So the idea that there can be addictions to medications and weird side effects to medications is something that people often disregard. And I think it's really bizarre because it's like, if you have any chronic condition, whether that be mental health conditions, physical conditions, etc., you kind of know that like medications are wacky. like who would think, you know, oh, by the way, you might get like panic attacks because of your asthma medication. What? So we're going to talk about, then Emily addresses Anthony and talking about piecing together the history that she had with Anthony. We're going to talk about that in the rhetoric section because that's a whole big part of Shannon's video that I personally had a huge problem with. Emily also mentions that Shannon had come up with usernames and like brought forward usernames and accounts that Emily had never even like couldn't remember, couldn't find on Google, couldn't pull up. So Emily was saying that there's like, this has to have been Shannon looking back, like way far back, and also having paid attention to Emily for 10 plus years, which was the allegation that Emily made against Shannon in the first video. I'm wondering, this is a question for y'all if you're still watching. Does the Wayback Machine work for that too? I don't understand how the Wayback Machine works for things that aren't, I've only used it for like magazine archives of like 1980s tech magazines. So I don't really know how it works, but I'm just curious. Like, could Shannon have used the Wayback Machine, or was she really like creeping this long? No pun intended, I suppose. My favorite line of the whole video is when Emily is talking about how she's had a problematic past and she hates when people in apologies say that I'm not that person anymore. Emily says, no, that person was me, and the growth will never be over. The work will never be over.
Regardless of Shannon's fucked upness, I have to also sit here and acknowledge my fucked upness at some of the comments I had posted in my early 20s. Something that I just can't stand is when a creator is called out for something and in their apology they claim they were a different person back then. The things that I posted did not come from a different person. That was still me. I have done a lot of work to scrutinize and analyze my past actions and to try and grow and change from them. And the work isn't over. It will never be over. I'm okay being confronted with these truths because I need to see them and I need to be reminded of them to continue to make better choices, not only for myself, but for my children and the people who I surround myself with. I've struggled with my mental health and drug addiction to many different substances over the years. And because of this, I was, not surprisingly, vulnerable.
And this is kind of what I've been trying to say about apologies and things like that. I have a video I'll tag in the cards, which I'm talking about like YouTube apologies and structures and things like that, and like why we trust influencers, and I'll tag that up there. But it's this idea that there's a certain detachment you can have with your own personal self and your thought processes. Even when you go to therapy and even when you do treatment and when you do all these things, there are certain like kind of more toxic parts of you that will kind of come back into your head. But like the work comes from being able to step away from these things. And the work comes from being able to understand where the bad and the good lies. So it's not, even things like, you know, I was a very angry person in my teen years, let's say, that frustration and that like almost uncontrollable angst that I once had will come back, and I'll recognize and be like, well, let's try to figure out where we're actually coming from here. So I thought that was like like that's the thing I feel like everyone wanted from every YouTube apology ever. And I just thought it was so interesting that that's a line that I feel like a lot of people are going to skim over. Then Emily talks about role reversals in the story time with the 13-year-old and the 17-year-old. I will get into that a little bit more in the rhetoric section, but this is essentially just a way of perception and managing trauma and hurt in an almost like hyperbolic fashion of a way of presenting things that is intentionally not true, but done so in a way to kind of rationalize pain, which was really interesting. And there are many forms of self-sabotage that do exist, especially as a form of attempted trauma reduction. And I was just very interested in that idea because it's like, I would have never thought of it that way, but it does make sense to hear it as such, and especially in the way Emily described it. I'm going to also splice a couple clips of my own video in here because like some of this is pretty relevant, but Emily mentions the Shannon taking colors of the walls and pillows and things like that. Do we remember my banger line where I said, just because there's a pill, like, oh, slept in a bed once means you're not homeless? Like, it was just two things couldn't exist at once, right? So a lot of the proof that Emily was not homeless involved pictures of her in houses. Now, guys, you can't be homeless if you ever set foot in a house, guys.
Emily said in her slanderous video that this firing led to her being homeless after leaving her abusive boyfriend who was forcing her to do cam work, which again, could not have happened.
They got me fired from my fucking job, and I actually ended up homeless for a period of time. So anytime Shannon talks about being homeless and having to live in her car, she did that to me.
Meaning she was never actually homeless. We can further prove she wasn't homeless based on Emily's own Instagram and the progression of photos she placed on them. She was fired on September 16th, 2013, according to her Instagram. Then, 9 days later, on September 25th, 2013, she posted her last photo at her father's home. We can tell that because of the pink wall in the background. The photo was captioned, "Love the way the stylistic styled my hair. It stayed this way even when I got home." So losing her job didn't impact her home life at all. The next picture she posts is this one on October 4th of some pillows on a bed with a white wall in the background. #pillows. It's funny how the littlest things he does for me makes my life even more amazing. Finally got a pillow for my side of the bed. This shows that she moved from her father's home into her boyfriend Bob's home. At no point was she sleeping on the street, and at no point was she dealing with an abusive ex who forced her into cam work. This is also the residence she stayed in with said boyfriend and his mother before she was able to move in with her now husband.
Yeah. Like, so there's pictures of her at her dad's house and her at the boyfriend's place. It is very possible that she still went back to the car right that night, or didn't have it. Like, you can couch hop and be homeless. In what world are you like W received when you say that? Like, are you what? So yeah, Emily debunks that as one could easily do. And I'm not saying that, like, I'm not reducing Emily's capacities in that by saying that, but it's like, thank you. Hello. Because like I heard that and I was like, ooh, dial back, huh? And then Emily continues with saying that there are unhealthy coping mechanisms with trauma processing, and that when you're young and you're dealing with all of these issues that are kind of compiling and compounding over time, that you kind of get lost in your capacities and you just kind of lose yourself in that process. Once that is done, Emily also brings up that no matter how much which this was probably the most popular comment I had on my video, which was like, claims to have not stalked Emily or claims to have no idea who Emily is, but has 20 years of receipts on her or 15 years of receipts on her. And I was like, yep. It's interesting because so often I will criticize people for taking commentary video points and spitting them back out, because this is something that a lot of influencers will do in a way to attempt to appease people for the sake of saving their own face. However, Emily did this in a more constructive manner where she's acknowledging in agreement in a way that kind of shows that she is aware of the community that's backing her, which I thought was really unique and compelling about this video. Interview with Bob talks about how you inevitably will contradict yourself in speech. This is something that I have mentioned before as well, that there's no way to keep track of everything you say. There's no way to be constantly on the same pathway, and there's no way to ignore your own change. You will contradict yourself. I literally have brought up multiple contradictions of my own words already in this video, such as the idea of deleting videos. Because there are different nuances to things, and you can't think of things as so black and white, and that's also the main problem with Creepshow Art's video, was this idea of if I can present something, that means it happened, whether or not it can be pieced together properly or not. Then Emily brings up like this manipulation tactic of like, oh, well, if I knew about all this stuff all along, I would have made an exposed video on Emily by now. So the if blank, then I would have blank by now. Manipulation tactic. I will get into that in the rhetoric section as well. This is something that I also mentioned. I did a if P not Q in my other video, so the problem is I didn't do if and only if. I did the wrong type of, I left too much open in my oversimplification of that, so we're not going to do that again. But the point is, I brought that up in my other video as well. And then they talk about the idea that guilty people over-explain. And let me tell you, 2.5 hours sounds like over-explaining to me. So I agree that that is, I don't know, take a shot every time I say I agree, but don't, unless it's water, because you will die. But yeah, Shannon went like so in depth on minuscule details, especially revolving her own involvement in things with the messages shown and all these different quote unquote receipts, in a way that seems like it was trying to close loopholes that no one would have conceived or thought of, while leaving open super obvious ones, such as Emily was never homeless, such as the actions of a 13-year-old are representative of a 30-year-old, etc. Emily says, again, something I said in my other video, and I'm so happy that Emily noticed this in Shannon's video, and it is, and I quote, Shannon uses Anthony's word as gospel truth. Now I'm going to play my video clip and Emily's back-to-back at the time. And I think what's hard about this whole video is it is using the word of Anthony as gospel. Now, if Anthony is, in fact, the abuser that he allegedly is, why would he not hide stuff from Shannon? Like, what makes it true because it came from Anthony specifically? Like, it's like Anthony is the word of gospel, and the video structure is based off of like claims that Anthony has made with her, which could have totally have been manipulated or out of context, the same way that, you know, Emily's could have allegedly been based on your own circumstance.
In Shannon's video, something bizarre that stuck out to me is this interaction Shannon had with Anthony about some review she left for Bob's place of work. Anthony completely and utterly fabricates the entire story all about how I had a tantrum that she even went into Bob's place of business. Shannon shows the conversation between her and Anthony and speaks as if that's enough evidence that the tantrum took place, which is another example of her taking what Anthony says as the gospel truth.
Emily didn't bring it up, but I'm going to bring it up again. I'm going to reiterate it. That when you have somebody who is allegedly as toxic as Anthony is and allegedly as manipulative as Anthony is, why would they tell you the truth? Again, when people have these types of mentalities on things, it's the same thing as like, or it's not the same thing. Let's make an equivalency. This is not at full severity comparison, but if you got with someone because they cheated on you, if you got with someone who cheated on their previous partner for you, how do you know they're not going to do it again? I know of some people that cheat like serial cheaters, like they over and over and over and over and over again. And it's like, you wonder like, well, when is it, like, who's going to make it stop? Is that even possible? Because it's like, there can be a new person who comes up every single time in their mentality, it seems, right? So it's like, if Anthony's willing to lie and manipulate and abuse partners, why does it stop at Shannon? Is she some sort of like, this is why the like, I can change him mentality that a lot of often traumatized women or non-binary people or even men will have with their partner is not good because of these exact paradoxes that or cycles that form. Emily brings up what, if I remember, I think it's Malcolm brought up, I'll also tag his channel and his videos down below. And I'll also do a Beauty Demons as well. Brings up, it's like, in what court of law, in what court of law does, what? In what court of law can you bring up a DeviantArt account of a 13-year-old who had a crush on her teacher and videos, sketchbook story times that can neither be proven true nor false, necessarily YouTube content that doesn't name or have consistent details of any person, because like if we're going to shape like defamation, for example, in what court of law is this doing anything? I swear, is it a YouTuber thing to think that anything against them is illegal? Girl, like it's like Keemstar always talking about like, you defames me, blah, 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 blah. Or Amberlynn Reid was allegedly like striking channels because they would like edit down and make her content like more interesting and then get more views than Amberlynn Reid does. Or Chantel Marie Foodie Beauty would try to strike commentary channels because people would watch them, or reaction channels, people would watch them instead of her because their content was more interesting. It's like, you can't attack someone legally for either being more right than you, for either talking about how you treated them in a way that's maybe not, which is not specific or in a defamatory fashion as far as being able to prove true or false, or like doing better than you in something. Like it's like, what's with these YouTubers being like suing time? Is it an American thing? And before people go, oh, Mika, that's mean, blah, blah, blah. It's because in Canada, it's so hard. It's so hard to sue people. Like, it's not something that you can just, like, wake up and be like, yeah. Like, there's so many, like, things get dropped very easily here. Emily mentions the need to correct Shannon's over-accusatory language. We'll get into that in the rhetoric section because that's literally critical discourse analysis. And I think I used Foucault's theories for that one. I can't remember, but we'll get to that when we get to that. The most damning part that Emily pulls up is, like, I don't need the same volume of evidence against Creepshow Art because I don't need to, because I don't need to pull petty bullshit from 10, 20 years ago, 15 years ago. I think 2007 was 15 years ago. I don't need to pull evidence from 15 years ago to show that you're not a good person. I can do it now. You can't pull evidence from me at any recent time because I'm not a bad person now. I've worked and I'm growing and I'm changing, but you are still petty, manipulative, and toxic, and overall doing all these things. So that was the tea. That was very iconic way to end that video, and a really cool painting of a Black Widow spider. I wish I had talent in art. I do not. I have squishmallows. That is my entire personality. I have squishmallows when I go to school. It's my whole aesthetic. It's my whole personality. Part 2, rhetoric of Shannon versus Emily's video. Obviously, if those of you who don't know, Shannon's Creepshow Art. Because I just realized I've said Shannon like 50 times. I've said Creepshow Art like twice. So Shannon's video does what's called working in absolutes. So Emily did this. Emily is this way. And here is an arbitrary factoid or set of receipts to attempt to prove myself in a guilty until proven innocent approach. This is again working under the assumption that if receipts are shown, that means that it's right, which is something I have a video on this, which is called the impact of no more lies, the rhetoric and impact of no more lies. I will tag in the cards. I talk about James Charles that started this trend of like, if I can show you anything, whether even though it like ages, it's even aged poorly up to the point of making this video, if I can back something up with something even remotely similar to the cause that I'm trying to prove, then it happened, which is so bizarre. And Creepshow Art's video is one of the biggest times where I've seen people, Creepshow Art's videos and that like god-awful Gabby Hanna series she was trying to do, are some of the first times where I've seen the internet go, wait. The presentations of receipts might be kind of toxic and not helpful at all to anything. So I really liked that we all posted up, la gang, posted up. And that video, I even talked about how Creepshow Art's video was using that ideology as well. Now we're going to talk about Miss Locale. So in rhetoric, we are informed So we as an audience and as people who create content are informed by real debates. Pathos of anger and mistrust and blatant lies was formed by Shannon, or put out, because pathos is like the emotional reaction, right? So Creepshow Art put that out by first making a community tab post, which I read in my first Creepshow Art video, which we'll put in the cards as well, and talking about like trying to, oh, people are ghosting my IP and this cannot be true and this is impossible, blah, 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 even though Kiwi Farms lolcow had already proven everything. And this idea that there is no way that at the level and volume that it occurred, this could have been right, and that other people found out and were admitted to that Shannon had done these things and made their own videos. I believe Tipster, Edwin's Generation, Ready to Glare, Smoky Glow, and Repzilla and Repzion made videos. While I don't personally support some of those creators, I will validate and acknowledge like the hurt that could have come from this and the frustration and anxiety that comes from someone being so flippant with their personal relationships with somebody for the sake of clout, but like in a way that is so vindictive and outwardly forms some sort of sabotage. When not addressed properly or formed in a way that actually makes any sense, the pathos of the audience becomes attached to your ethos, which is your personal reputation. And these things compound over time, which is why even I would agree like James Charles got canceled in 2019, because it wasn't just the Tati Westbrook allegations, because again, I feel like people would have heard him out more, which is why the allegations now have less weight because it's kind of gone the other way. But it was also like James Charles's ego, past scandals, the $500 Sisters tour tickets, and like the obnoxious Coachella outfits. And then it was the Bi Sister that kind of came in and knocked everything over, right? It's like you can only blow on a house of cards so many times before it falls, if that makes any sense. So it's Chaim Perelman. See, before people go, why do you not even know how to pronounce the names of the people you study? Because you read the books. Like, you're not, like, being told their names, especially because I've had most of my semesters online in, like, asynchronous format. I don't know how to pronounce anything because it's all how my head pronounces things. And then I write papers with their names in them, but I'm not corrected on my pronunciation in my papers. But regardless, Chaim Perelman describes that there's a history of good laws and practices, and absolutism tries to be universal without going into the history of social practices. So for Perelman, it is the basis of social practices and values with real audiences and real acts that inform parts of debates. So Emily's talking about how she has to piece together the trauma with Anthony. And it works on the idea of understanding, Emily's video works on the idea of understanding aspects of the human condition instead of Shannon's video that is so stone cold and quote unquote factual, where it's like, if something bad happened, then why not mean after? Like these very basic aspects that are not true of the human condition. I mentioned this in my previous video as well, but people who are victims of different forms of abuse will often lightly stay with their partners or even never get out of the relationships because you're stuck in this cycle of trying to figure out if they actually do love you. If you feel like you can be loved by somebody else, I talked about this in my Gus Johnson videos as well, that like you can't always just leave, especially if you're in some sort of advantageous position where you feel like you cannot live properly without these quote unquote maybe perks that this person is giving you. In combination with the trauma that Emily was facing, she was in recovery and coming in and out of addiction and had a supposedly like traumatic childhood. So it's the human condition is flawed and the human condition is inconsistent. And this idea that there has to be this blatant consistency with everything all of the time is frankly inhuman. And rhetoric as a practice acknowledges this. And that's probably why it's not considered a quote unquote science, because of the inconsistencies of the social condition. But that is how it is. I don't really know what to tell you guys. I want to talk about now the switching roles in the story times. So Emily expresses understanding the interpretation of how Shannon would have alleged that Emily was predatory given the relationship of the 13 and the 17-year-old. But while in reality, Emily had flipped the script to not kind of have the details be obvious to people, but as well as a form of self-sabotage because Emily feels bad that they even got into that relationship in the first place.
At several points, Shannon tries to connect random people that I've dated to specific old storytime videos and paints that as a 100% fact, and as me formally accusing all of these people of abuse. Not one of her assumptions is correct, specifically because of my habit for switching details around for identity protection, but I'll get to that in a moment. I also don't accuse a bunch of random people of serious abuse in all of those videos. This is just another example of Shannon's hoping you won't go back and check. The storytime videos I made about certain relationships were mostly for entertainment, and although the stories were real, many identifying facts and information had to be changed or switched around between other story times, something that Shannon even points out in her video. I didn't want to ever fabricate stories, so instead I would take real details and rearrange them, sometimes between completely different situations. I did this for multiple reasons. To make certain stories have an actual resolution, because a good number of them didn't, for the protection of the people within the stories, or in the specific cases Shannon highlighted, the protection of myself. That being said, some of my past story times were actually about me. I would deliberately switch the roles around, change the details, and retell the story with me as the protagonist instead of the clumsy, embarrassing drug addict or drunk. This was not something I did on just that one video. What a coincidence. This was actually something I did a few times, which, like I said before, is something Shannon even pointed out. These videos are noticeably different from my other videos because, one, I am needlessly cruel to the, quote, antagonist of the video, and they are clearly painted out to be the bad guy. And two, the videos are a lot more detached from emotion, mocking even. I probably would have made more videos like that had I not been in therapy. I learned I did this as an unhealthy form of self-punishment, as I would often mock the, quote, antagonist in these stories. These stories, really these situations that I was in, have haunted my nightmares. I felt guilt, pain, shame, embarrassment, and intense anxiety over them. I felt like I was keeping a secret. Like,
when we look at Michel Foucault has different models, there are multiple that Emily has followed in this expression of the videos, which makes it believable for people like Shannon, but also kind of help them sit with themselves. So there's limits and forms of expressibility. So what can we speak about and what can we not speak about? So Emily felt like she was not allowed to speak about the fact that this happened to her because Emily felt guilty that in the place that she was in, that her platform would kind of take off in a negative way against that person given the relationship was exposed in the way that it actually ended up happening. Limits of forms and conservation is what forms disappeared, what was repressed, or what was censored. So again, this is Emily repressing the events and kind of censoring them in the sense of shuffling the events because of this idea of what the audience's perception will be. And is this a really good idea to do? No. And Emily mentions that this wasn't a good idea. That's the other thing, is like Emily addresses these factors and what has involved with her video through these rhetorical lenses, just kind of without naming them, which makes sense when you don't go to school for naming them. And finally, I just want to get into the Shannon's kind of manipulative language of like, if I knew this all along, then I would have made an exposed video, and the accusatory language, so the if blank, but I would have done blank thing. So Richard Weaver talks about what's called responsible rhetoric. This means presenting your arguments in a clear and concise way that is helpful to the audience to understand an opinion of the person and the topic addressed. This is what I try to do in my videos, which is why I structure them in a way of like A, B, C, kind of, or part 1, part 2, part 3. And I try to kind of bring forward that I'm understanding different biases that I might have, or contradictions I might have had, or marginalized groups, or people that have had a disadvantage in the positions of these arguments. What's called inverted rhetorical justification is fancy word for propaganda. Now, propaganda as a concept is something that a lot of people think is an advertisement thing. While yes, pretty frequently, it actually will tend to be something to inform a cause. And Shannon's video was informing the cause that we need to cancel Emily. And well, not even though Creepshow Art wanted to retire, because Creepshow Art was trying to do like a, I'm going to pull them down with me idea. So here are the 4 characteristics of propaganda. And I'm going to put in a piece of Shannon's video for every single one of these. So 1 is name calling.
When I show proof of her lies from her own accounts, she can further claim that that in and of itself is stalking. Emily created a false narrative, so no matter what is said after, even if I debunk all of her claims, she can still claim that she is the victim. That is why I made the decision to handle this legally before I ever responded back publicly.
2 is false cause and effect. So if this thing is happening, then this.
To quickly take the time to point out how Emily talked about her relationship with Anthony on her YouTube channel prior to making this video. In her My Ex-Girlfriend Destroyed My Art video, Emily states that she has only had 2 bad relationships in her entire life, that being with a mutual friend named Sean, who she stated cheated on her, and the 13-year-old she dated when she was 17.
False analogies and false appeal to authority. So even I can just ring them off right now. Shannon name calls Emily, calls her crazy and stuff throughout the video. False cause and effect. If pillow on bed, then not homeless. False analogies. This idea that the 13-year-old having a crush on their teacher means that they were predatory in relationships in the future. And false appeal to authority. Anthony's word is gospel. So Shannon's previous video works on a propaganda model. But in contrast, Emily works on what's called a standard rhetorical justification model, which is what I described. These topics that she was addressing and the way that she was addressing them fall in line with rhetorical theory from other rhetoricians. And this is why I think you can actually technically classify Shannon's other video as propaganda. And while that might seem hyperbolic from a standard, some colloquial definition of propaganda, as you can see from Richard Weaver's propaganda model, which has been utilized in these conversations since that point, I think it's a good one. Anyways, Goyles, this is a long one. So in conclusion, I think this all seems to be over, at least in the public eye, which is good. And I'm happy that Emily was able to address everything. And I'm happy that Emily didn't seem too torn up in the video, so we can have a little bit less of a serious conversation with this one. Anyways, like, comment, subscribe. All of links and yeehaw whatevers are in the description. Squish Gang says goodbye. So do I. And you guys have a great day wherever you are. Bye.
I accidentally bought one of those Canadian bottles and it's got the French on it. It says soft drink or bussin' gazoos.